If you are not of fully African descent, then right now, inside your body, in nearly every one of your cells, you are carrying the DNA of another human species, a species that is not us, a species that vanished from the face of the earth around 40,000 years ago and has not walked the planet since. The Neanderthals. It's not a metaphor, it's not poetic, it's literal, physical fact. Roughly 1 to 2% of the DNA of most people outside of Africa comes directly from Neanderthals. In some populations, it's even more. You may have inherited the gene that shapes part of your skin, or your hair, or how your immune system fights off disease from a Neanderthal ancestor who lived and died tens of thousands of years ago. They are, in a very real and measurable sense, still here, inside us. And that single, staggering fact completely rewrites the story most of us were told. Because we tend to imagine the meeting between our ancestors and the Neanderthals as a clash, a war, the clever modern humans arriving and wiping out the dim-witted cavemen, conquering them, replacing them. But that's not what the DNA says. The DNA says something far stranger, far more complicated, and far more intimate happened when these two kinds of human met. So here's the question this whole video is about. What actually happened when Homo sapiens first met the Neanderthals? And here's the thing nobody tells you. The truest answer to that question isn't written in some textbook or carved on some ancient wall. It's written in you. But before we get to the meeting, we have to clear up an enormous misunderstanding. Because to understand what happened, you have to understand who the Neanderthals actually were. And almost everything you think you know about them is wrong. When you hear the word Neanderthal, you probably picture a brutish, hunched, grunting, stupid caveman. The very word has become an insult, a way of calling someone primitive and dumb. But that image is a complete fiction, a relic of outdated science and lazy cartoons. The real Neanderthals were nothing like it. The Neanderthals were a highly successful, intelligent species of human that thrived across Europe and parts of Asia for a staggering length of time, far longer than our own species has even existed. Think about that. By the time our ancestors showed up, the Neanderthals had already been successfully surviving the brutal, freezing, predator-filled world of Ice Age Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. They were perfectly adapted to it, stocky and powerfully muscled, to conserve heat and overpower large prey, with brains that were, on average, every bit as large as our own, possibly even larger. And they were capable of remarkable things. They made sophisticated stone tools. They controlled fire. They hunted enormous, dangerous Ice Age animals in coordinated groups, which takes planning, communication, and courage. They wore clothing. They made shelters. There's compelling evidence that they buried their dead, that they created art and used pigments, that they wore decorative objects. And as we've explored before in the story of how ancient humans cared for their injured Neanderthal skeletons show healed injuries that prove they cared for their sick and wounded, keeping helpless members of their group alive for years. These were not mindless brutes. They were people, intelligent, capable, caring people who happened to belong to a different branch of the human family. And the specific evidence is genuinely moving once you look at it. At one famous site, archaeologists found a Neanderthal who had survived for years with severe injuries, a withered arm, a damaged leg, likely blind in one eye, kept alive only because his group fed and protected him, long after he could contribute. That is not the behavior of brutes. That is compassion, tens of thousands of years before us. At other sites, Neanderthals collected eagle talons and pierced them, almost certainly to wear as jewelry or ornaments, a purely symbolic act, a statement of identity or beauty. They used red ochre pigment. There are even cave markings and structures deep underground, in places that could only be reached with fire and intention. That appear to be their work. And here's a small but profound detail. Neanderthals had the same version of a key gene associated with speech and language that we do, and the physical anatomy of their throat, and a tiny bone in the neck, suggest they were physically capable of complex speech. In other words, they very likely talked. They had language. Picture that for a moment. These other humans sitting around their own fires, in the freezing Ice Age dark, speaking to one another in words we will never hear, telling stories we will never know. They were not a rough draft of humanity. They were a whole parallel version of it. So when our ancestors, anatomically modern Homo sapiens, began migrating out of Africa and into Eurasia, tens of thousands of years ago, they were not walking into an empty wilderness. They were walking into a land that was already inhabited, a land that had belonged for ages to these other humans. And so, somewhere, at some point, it happened. Two different kinds of human, who had been evolving separately for hundreds of thousands of years, looked across a valley, or a river, or a clearing, and saw each other for the very first time. Try to imagine that moment, to picture standing there and seeing someone who is clearly a person, clearly human, walking upright, carrying tools, watching you back with intelligent eyes, and yet who is also unmistakably different, shorter, stockier, heavy-browed. A stranger not just from another tribe, but from another kind of humanity entirely. We will never know what passed through their minds in that instant. Fear? Curiosity? Wonder? Hostility? Probably, across the thousands of times. This meeting happened in different places, all of those things, and more. So what happened next? And here we come to the great revelation, the one written in our genes. For a long time, scientists debated whether modern humans and Neanderthals ever interbred at all. Many assumed they were two different, separate species that could never have had children together. But then, in one of the greatest scientific achievements of our age, researchers managed to do something extraordinary. They extracted and sequenced DNA from Neanderthal bones tens of thousands of years old. They read the Neanderthal genome, and then they compared it to our own. And the result stunned the world. Because there, in the DNA of living people all over the planet, was the unmistakable signature of the Neanderthals. We hadn't just met them, we had children with them. The scientist who led much of this work spent years on what many thought was an impossible task, pulling fragile, contaminated, degraded genetic material out of bones, tens of thousands of years old, and it earned one of the highest honors in science, precisely because it opened a window into the past that we never thought we'd have. And the window kept revealing more. At one site in Europe, researchers found the jawbone of a modern human man who lived around 40,000 years ago, and his DNA showed that he had a Neanderthal ancestor, just 4 to 6 generations back. Think about how close that is. This was a man who, if you traced his family tree back, only a handful of generations would find a full Neanderthal sitting in it, like a great-great-grandparent. The mixing wasn't ancient history even to him. It was recent family. There's also a fascinating wrinkle in the genetic story. It turns out the Neanderthal DNA we carry is missing certain pieces. In particular, we don't seem to carry Neanderthal Y chromosomes, the part passed strictly from father to son, or their mitochondrial DNA. The part passed strictly from mother to child. The likely reasons are complex, but it hints that the interbreeding may have been uneven in ways we're still untangling, and that some Neanderthal modern human pairings may have produced children who weren't fully fertile. The full picture is still coming into focus, but the headline is beyond dispute. The two kinds of human, modern and Neanderthal, had mated and produced offspring, and those offspring lived and had children of their own and passed that Neanderthal DNA down generation after generation in an unbroken chain that reaches all the way to the cells in your body right now. This wasn't a single, isolated event either. The evidence suggests interbreeding happened multiple times in multiple places across thousands of years. Wherever these two kinds of human met and lingered, at least some of the time, they came together. The boundary between the species, which we imagine as a hard, clear line, was in reality blurry, porous, and crossed again and again. And it gets even more astonishing, because the Neanderthals weren't the only other humans out there. In a cave in Siberia, scientists discovered an entirely new kind of ancient human, called the Denisovans, identified almost entirely from their DNA. And we interbred with them too. People in parts of Oceania today carry significant amounts of Denisovan DNA. But the single most jaw-dropping discovery of all came from a tiny fragment of bone from that Siberian cave. When scientists sequenced its DNA, they found something almost unbelievable. The bone belonged to a young girl who had lived around 90,000 years ago, and her mother was a Neanderthal. Her father was a Denisovan. She was a first-generation hybrid, the direct child of two different human species. We found her by pure chance, from a single scrap of bone. And the fact that we stumbled onto a first-generation hybrid so easily tells us this mixing between different kinds of humans wasn't rare at all. It was happening all the time. Think about that for a second. For a brief, extraordinary window in prehistory, the Earth was home to multiple different kinds of human, living alongside each other, meeting each other, and sometimes falling in together and raising children who carried the blood of two separate species. It sounds like fantasy. It is simply our history. And this is maybe the hardest thing for us to truly absorb because it's so foreign to the world we live in now. Today, there is only one kind of human on Earth, just us. We are so used to being alone that we treat it as the natural order of things. But for the overwhelming majority of the time our lineage has existed, that was not the case. The planet was home to several kinds of human at once. Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans across the East, our own ancestors spreading out of Africa, and we now know almost certainly other, more mysterious lineages we are only beginning to find traces of in the DNA. For hundreds of thousands of years, to be human was to share the world with other humans who were not your kind. You might travel far enough and meet people who walked and spoke and built fires, but who were as different from you as you were from them. The lonely position we occupy today, as the only humans left, is actually the strange exception. It is brand new, and it is, when you sit with it, a little melancholy. We are the last surviving species of a once crowded family, the only ones who made it to the end, and we are left holding the memory and the genes of all the cousins who didn't. So now here's the question that should be sitting in the back of your mind. If we met them and mixed with them and had children with them, then why are they gone? If Neanderthals were so intelligent and capable and well adapted, and if we got along well enough to start families, then what happened to them? Why is it that we are still here and they vanished from the Earth around 40,000 years ago? And the honest answer, the one I have to give you, because this channel always tries to be honest, is that we don't fully know. This is one of the great unsolved mysteries of human history, and there is no single agreed upon answer. But there are several powerful possibilities, and the truth is probably a combination of all of them. The first possibility is the gentlest, and it ties directly to everything we've just learned. Maybe the Neanderthals didn't entirely die out at all. Maybe, at least in part, they were absorbed. Here's the logic. The Neanderthal population was always relatively small and thinly spread. Our own population, surging out of Africa, was larger and growing. When a small population continually mixes with and is folded into a much larger one, over enough generations, the smaller group's distinct identity simply dissolves into the larger one. Their genes don't disappear. They get diluted, spread thin, carried onward inside the larger population. By this thinking, the Neanderthals didn't all die. Some of them, in a sense, became us. Their bloodline never ended. It just merged into ours, which is exactly why you can still find it in your DNA today. But absorption probably isn't the whole story, because they did, as a distinct people, disappear. So what else was at work? A second possibility is competition, and it may be the most important of all. Two kinds of human. Hunting the same animals, gathering the same plants, sheltering in the same caves, in the same cold and challenging land. If our ancestors were even slightly better at surviving, through some advantage in tools, in social organization, in communication, in numbers, then over thousands of years, we may have simply outcompeted them for the resources both groups needed. Not through dramatic war, but through the slow, grinding pressure of two species wanting the same finite world. Slowly, the Neanderthals would have been squeezed into smaller and smaller territories, their numbers dwindling. A third possibility is climate. The Neanderthals lived through an unstable, often brutally cold period, and there were dramatic, rapid swings in the climate during the time they were disappearing. Perhaps these environmental shocks hit their populations especially hard, and our more numerous, perhaps more flexible ancestors weathered the changes better. A population already small and stretched thin is terribly vulnerable to a run of bad years. A few harsh winters in a row, a collapse in the herds they depended on. Where a large population can absorb such losses and recover, a small one can be pushed, step by step, toward a point of no return. And we cannot rule out darker possibilities. It's likely that when our ancestors and Neanderthals met, it wasn't always peaceful. There may well have been conflict, competition turning to violence, the same way human groups have come into conflict throughout all of history. The truth is, we have very little direct evidence either way, and the honest position is that the meeting was probably neither a simple romance nor a simple war. Across thousands of years and countless encounters, it was very likely all of it. Moments of curiosity and connection, moments of fear and violence, moments of indifference. The full, complicated range of what happens when two groups of people meet. The most likely answer to why the Neanderthals vanished is that no single thing killed them. Instead, a small, thinly spread population, already vulnerable, faced the combined pressure of competition, climate change, and absorption into a larger group all at once over thousands of years. And slowly, the distinct people we call the Neanderthals faded from the world until one day, somewhere, the very last one of them died. And with that death, an entire branch of humanity, which had endured for hundreds of thousands of years, was gone, almost. Because here is what I find genuinely haunting and genuinely beautiful about this whole story. The Neanderthals are extinct, yes. There are no more of them as a distinct people. The last one died tens of thousands of years ago, and we will never know who they were or where they fell. But they are not entirely gone. They live on, scattered and diluted, but real, inside billions of us. Every time a person outside of Africa is born, they carry a little piece of the Neanderthals forward into the future, a faint echo of those other humans who once shared our world. The DNA in your cells is a living monument to a vanished people. You are, in a small but literal way, part of the proof that they ever existed at all. And that DNA isn't just sitting there inertly either. Those Neanderthal genes are doing things inside us right now. Scientists have found that the bits of Neanderthal DNA we carry influence real traits, aspects of our skin and hair, the way our immune systems respond to infection, even things like how our bodies handle certain modern diseases. When the Neanderthals interbred with our ancestors, they may have passed on genes that had been fine-tuned over hundreds of thousands of years to survive in Eurasia, gifts of adaptation that helped our own ancestors survive in that new and hostile land. In a strange way, the Neanderthals may have helped us conquer the very world they were vanishing from. So let's bring this whole extraordinary story together. What happened when Homo Sapiens first met the Neanderthals? The answer is not the simple tale of conquest we were told. What happened was a meeting between two kinds of intelligent, capable, fully human people. What happened was curiosity and probably fear, and certainly conflict, but also again and again connection, families, children who belong to both worlds at once. And then, over thousands of slow years, what happened was that one of those two kinds of human faded from the earth, through a tangle of competition and climate and absorption that we are still working to understand. The Neanderthals lost their place in the world, but they never entirely lost their thread in the human story, because that thread was woven directly into us. So here's my last question for you. We tend to think of ourselves, Homo Sapiens, as the lone humans, the only ones, the single thread of humanity that made it. But for most of our existence, that wasn't true. We shared this planet with other kinds of people, looked into faces, both human and not quite human, and in the deepest, most intimate way possible, we joined our story to theirs. They are gone now, and we are the ones left to remember them. So the next time you catch your reflection, consider that some small part of what you see, the shape of a feature, the cast of your skin, a quiet defender in your immune system, may be a gift or an inheritance from another kind of human who watched the same Ice Age stars you'd recognize and who has been gone for 40,000 years. What does it mean, do you think, that we are the last human standing and that we carry the vanished ones inside us as we go? Let me know what you think in the comments. I genuinely want to hear it. Until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I'll see you soon.